Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. And this is episode number 64, where I'm going to talk about the color pair primer for the one, aka Phyrexia All will be one. So I'm going to look at each color and try to identify the most important cards that I think are going to be key for the color's success. And then we're going to look at each color pair, and also I'm going to try to look at the cards where I think that those cards are specifically particularly good in this particular color combination. Before we go into that, obviously this stream is sponsored by MTGA Zone. MTGA Zone, where you can find articles about almost anything. Now I have a carte blanche of writing again, and I wrote an article about toxic, only toxic, theory crafting about toxic, all the angles that you can take in toxic, what kind of creatures you have should impact your strategy, how you can play toxic to kill with the poison counters, how you can play toxic to activate your corrupted abilities, and how to not use toxic when you are not planning to do either of those things. So this was all about that. But of course, I'm not the only one writing there. Paulo Vitor da Rosa is writing there. J2S Josh is writing great articles about limited, so check up his stuff. Yeah, go there, and the more clicks it gets, the more likely that they're going to prolong the relationship with me. Okay, let's go into the topic. But before we start anything, I always have my small preamble. And today's preamble is that deck predictions before the format releases are more useful for your self-evaluation than for the format itself. I'm always trying to hammer the message through that evaluating cards when you never played with them is extremely hard, and it's a lot of guesswork. Evaluating format before it starts is more of an exam of how you understand your fundamentals. And that's why I think that evaluating the format yourselves before the format hits and trying to get which cards you think are going to be important, which strategies are going to be more powerful than the others, is a good way of testing yourself. It's like a good exam for your understanding of how Magic operates. Because, of course, data is going to verify it. So you will get the information where you've been wrong, where you've been right. And based on where you were wrong and where you were right, you can actually start thinking about, okay, this means I maybe don't understand particular things. And you can look at that and try to improve it next time. And this is why I think that there's a large group of people that absolutely love set reviews and deck skeletons before the set review, and there's a lot of people that also say that it's quite useless. But I think that if you look at it from the perspective that you're testing yourself, not the format, you're going to find it much more useful. But to do that, you need to be honest with yourself, and you need to make solid predictions, then test them. And if they are wrong, then you have to think, okay, what did I miss in this particular situation? What did I miss about this card? How did I not look at the context of the card when I was evaluating it? How did I not see that this deck actually has gaping holes in this strategy, and there are cards that it doesn't have, and therefore it will not work? So I think that that's why pre-release analysis of the format are quite important. It is a good tool to evaluate yourself in a way that is not forgiving, and also even if half of your predictions are wrong but some of them are right, you gain a lot of potential. So you know the cards, you know the combinations, you know the mechanics, you have to think about all those things, so you're slightly better prepared, even if you misinterpreted the power of a particular archetype or the power of a particular card. So it will always give you some benefits in the first play, but also I think long term, it is the perfect way of evaluating your own fundamentals and how well do you understand them. And also how good you are in applying those fundamentals in a novel environment, because that's the whole problem. If you need to reevaluate Ikoria, easily you remember what was happening there and you can do that. That's more of a test of a memory, while evaluating a format that you never played, never played with any cards, it shows your flexibility on how you apply those fundamentals to the particular environment. All right. So I'm going to start with colors evaluation. I'm going to look at best bombs, just for you to be wary of their existence. I'm going to try to look at universal cards. And by universal cards, I mean cards that I think are going to be pretty good in every single color pair that this color participates in. Then I'm going to look at what I think are top commons and what I think are top uncommons for each color. And that's we're going to do that for the five. And after that, I'm going to look at each color pair and I'm going to look at the top uncommons and top commons for those. And I'm going to focus maybe not on the cards that I think are going to be the most powerful, but I'm going to focus on the cards that are going to be most pivotal to have in your decks in those particular color pairs. So, white. When you look at the bombs, white is not shy of having them. And I think that like all three of the cards that I showcase here are going to be absolutely annoying to play against. So first we have the Eternal Wanderer. That's a 6-mana planeswalker, 5 loyalty. No more than one creature can attack it. And it has uptick for 1, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step, which is a great ability because you can blink something of your own to get an extra ETB effect. But as an aggressive strategy, you can actually exile something, remove it as a blocker, and it only returns to the battlefield at the end of that player's next turn. So it won't be able to block, and it's also not going to be able to attack you. So it's a quite flexible ability there. At 0, you get a 2/2 samurai with double strike, and at -4, which again, Eternal Wanderer survives its ultimate. You choose one creature for each player, and all the players sacrifice all creature except for the things that you chose, which works like you pick the worst thing that the opponent has and the best thing that you have, and the rest of the board basically dies. Since you're going to keep a good creature, there is a good chance that if they don't have an instant removal, they will not be able to kill the Wanderer next turn, and you will be able to create the Samurais or blink something next turn uh, to increase the loyalty of the Wanderer. Now, this card looks absolutely busted. With pride, I can say I've beaten it during the pre-release, but I played it in a situation where opponent couldn't use either of the abilities to survive because I had exactly 2 oil counters on the 1/1 that pings for 1. They were at 2 life, and I also had Urbrask's Forge. So if they killed all my 1/1 that pings, I would have killed them with the Forge. If they played the double strike samurai that deals with the Forge token, I would have picked them out, and I was in a perfect situation that I could have beaten it. But it's very unlikely that that kind of thing is going to happen. So I was super lucky that I had exactly the Urabrask Forge. They were exactly at 2 life, and if that was not the case, it would have been pretty complicated. Next bomb is the White Sun's Twilight. That's an X and white. You gain X life and you create X 1/1 colorless Pyrexian Might artifact creatures that cannot block and have toxic 1. But if X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures except for the mites that you just created. So it's an amazing card. You basically wrath them for 7 mana, and you keep however mana X is over 5 or 5 or more, which means that you're probably going to win this game unless they can deal with all the 5 mice at the same time. This card also, at some stages when you have enough mana, is going to bring you back into the game from very much behind. And in some very fringe cases, maybe the gaining X life is just going to be enough to win the race. So it's quite flexible. However, you probably want to play it for 7 mana. So you have to keep in mind this is not like a bomb like that you can play for 5 mana and forget about the game. This is the one that you have to build into, and you have to make sure that your deck can survive until you get 7 mana, which in best of 1 will be probably like turn 8 or 9. So quite a long game it has to be. And last bomb is Elish Norn, Mother of the Machines. 5 mana, 4/7 Vigilance. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. And permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. So they don't have any ETBs, you have double at ETBs, and the body is just absolutely humongous. It's a 4/7 with Vigilance for 5 mana. So that thing is going to wreak havoc on the board unless they have like a proper unconditional removal, All the pacifism effects don't work very well with it because you will still get double ETB, so they really have to deal with it. Great card. And I think, all of those cards are going to be a mess. I think white has multiple other bomby kind of cards that could have been on that list. So it looks like white is the place where you want to have your bomby things. Very important thing to notice is that neither of those bombs really play very well with toxic, except maybe for the White Sun's Twilight that generates those mites, and then they can kill with toxic damage if opponent doesn't deal with them. But neither Elish Norn or the Eternal Wanderer play very well with toxic, which is strange because white does seem like a color that is fixated on playing the toxic thing. So you'll have to think if they are powerful, but are they synergistic enough to fit in your deck? And I think that on pure power, they will of course make it, but the point is that putting those powerful cards that don't play towards your plan might be a risky strategy. Maybe there will be builds that utilize those bombs much better, that don't include having toxic, or don't include at least planning to kill with toxic. Maybe they will include getting corrupted on board early, and then playing value cards. In terms of the universal cards, I think that these three are pretty much going to be decent in every single archetype. Crawling Chorus is a 1 mana toxic 1/1, and when it dies, it creates a 1/1 might that also has toxic but cannot block. And I think that this card is going to be great in all the archetypes that focus on dealing toxic damage, so white green and white black specifically. But it's also going to be good in white red, where maybe you will get a couple of those corrupted payoffs when playing a 1-drop, and getting this first toxic damage is quite important. And also it generates 2 bodies, which means that your equipment, which theoretically is the theme of white red, is going to be happy to utilize. And in white blue, it's also on the death, it creates an artifact creature, which sort of plays into the alleged artifact synergy of the white blue. Then there's the Duelist of the Deep Faith. I think that this is also another toxic creature, another early toxic drop, but it's also a creature that gets first strike on your turn, which means that it's really good at pushing damage. And I think that it will work well also in the equipment deck with the thing like the +1/-1 equipment when it becomes a 3/1 first striker, very hard to deal. So I think that as much as toxic doesn't matter, the 2/2 first striker does in this particular case. And the last card that I have on the universal card list is Planar Disruption, the 2 mana pacifism that can actually enchant a planeswalker, which is, I think, the first for those pacifism effects. I mean, obviously, Oblivion Rings effects did deal with planeswalker, but pacifisms are not designed for planeswalkers. Enchanted permanent can attack or block, and its activated abilities cannot be activated. So yeah, really good, solid card. It would be just good in any white deck because it's cheap, it removes stuff, and especially if the format is aggressive, the chance of being blown out with the card by someone destroying an enchantment is going to be pretty low, especially that there is no really good enchantment removal in the format. So these might stay on board quite longer than you would expect. And if you make the game shorter, of course, the shorter the game, the less of the chance that those things happen. So top commons, according to me, I put Zealot's Conviction. I think it's going to be one of the top commons on win rate in general, and in white in particular. That's a 1 mana, 1 white aura with flash. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. And if you have corrupted, it gets +2/+1 and first strike instead. And this is, of course, an ability that changes. So maybe initially you will play it as a +1/+1. And then when it becomes the creature, when you get the corrupt, it updates to +2/+1 and first strike. 1 mana for +2/+1 first strike that stays there permanently is just an insane rate. And I think that this card initially is going to be maybe undervalued by more beginner players, and therefore its numbers are going to be high because people will know exactly when to play with it. But this card is not going to be good in every deck, of course. It's going to be great in decks that can activate Corrupted quite early. So you will think about something like a white black deck that has a lot of toxic 1-drops. that can get on board quite easily, or maybe a white green deck that has Toxic 2 quite a lot and it gets there quickly. Card number 2 on my list, Flensing Raptor, is, I think, a card that will help it drastically to get corrupted online. This is the 3 mana 2/2 flyer with Toxic 1. And when it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control with Toxic gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. Now, with Toxic, um, evasive threats are going to be prime, and I think that that's why Flensing Raptor is going to be good, because if you have multiple copies of it, you will have a very powerful deck. On my pre-release, that was my loss. I lost to a deck that had multiple Flensing Raptors, and even though my deck was almost there in terms of stabilizing, it's just so much harder to stabilize against a lot of toxic damage, because you can't heal yourself, you cannot gain life. You're sitting there at 8 toxic, and just a couple of things just kill you almost instantly. So those long playing decks have a really big problem with cards like Flensing Raptor. That's why I think it's going to be in the top commons. I think it's going to be absolutely crucial in the early weeks to build those toxic based decks and make them successful. And I think Planar Disruption, the pacifism, is also going to be among the top commons, because the card just looks powerful enough, cheap enough, especially 2 mana is just so important for those cards, because on turn 4 you can remove a blocker and still play a threat. And building wide boards, if you're planning to kill with Toxic, is going to be, in my opinion, quite important. In terms of uncommons, I think that White has a decent roster of good uncommons. I had, I think, 5 candidates for that top 3 list, but in the end, I decided to go with the Job on Duelist, the 2 mana 1/1 double strike with Toxic. I think that since you're going to try to play combat tricks in those Toxic decks, because your threats are going to be quite small, obviously those combat tricks are so much better on a double strike creature. And again, depending on your plan, as I speculated in the article I mentioned at the preamble, um, I think that decks that want to just get corrupted and then kill with normal damage are going to prefer combat tricks that go face. But actually, decks that want to kill with poison, their main aim of playing combat tricks is to make their creature survive. And that's why, in any kind of white combination deck, I'm pretty high on the Death Touch plus Indestructible trick, because that makes your creature survive and win the combat. And this on Job on Duelist is actually much more relevant, because even if it's double blocked, it kills both creatures and survives. So it can create a massive swing. That's why I think that this card is going to be essential for those kind of I kill with toxic decks. Another uncommon, Annex Sentry, the 3 mana 1/4 with Toxic 1. When it ETBs, it exiles target creature or artifact an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until it leaves the battlefield. That's just a very good on-rate creature that changes the situation on board dramatically, and allows you to push maybe 1, maybe 2 toxic damage when it enters the battlefield, which is, again, super important both when you want to kill with Toxic and when you want to uh, get corrupted online. And the last uncommon, Ossification, that's a 2 mana aura that enchants a basic you control. And when it ETBs, exile target creature or planeswalker until it leaves the battlefield. So Oblivion Ring, but that's sort of an aura for a land. It's going to be very rare that this thing is going to be destroyed. It's almost as good as hard removal. Hard exile removal, because there's just so few things, ways of dealing with it, that it's going to be there sitting on the battlefield. So yeah, for 2 mana, exile anything, that's an amazing rate. Keep in mind, though, that a couple of times there you're going to be punished very hard if someone actually gets a way of destroying it. Blue. The bombs, the level of the bombs in blue is way lower than in white. Still, Blue Sun's Twilight is insane. That's an X blue sorcery. Gain control of target creature of mana value X or less. If X is 5 or more, create a token that is a copy of that creature. So, like, if you play it for 7, you can copy a 5-drop and you actually gain steal a 5-drop and you gain a copy of that. So that's 3 for 1, is it? Or something. They lose a creature, you gain 2 creatures, 3 for 1. Card is obviously really good. It is slow, so keep in mind to play it in decks that will survive till that turn 9. Another bomb, Jace the Perfected Mind. I was lucky enough to open it in my pre-release. It's a Planeswalker for 2 blue and Phyrexian blue, so you can play it for 3 mana and 2 life, or for 4 mana. It's completed, so if you use the Phyrexian mana, it was going to come with 2 loyalty counters less. First ability, until end of your next turn, up to 1 target creature gets -3, -0 until your next turn, not until the end of your next turn, but until your next turn. -2, target player mills 3. Then, if a graveyard has 20 or more cards, you draw 3 cards. Otherwise, you draw a card. So basically, somewhere in the late game, if you play it and there was some milling going on, you can actually draw 3 cards out of it, which is quite a good deal. Otherwise, I don't think that ability is going to be used very often. And it also has -X, target player mills 3 times X cards. So if it ETBs, you can mill 15. I played it on the Pearlies, and I managed to mill my opponent by playing it, plussing it, and then minusing for 7 and milling 21 cards. And the plussing, the giving -3, -0 creatures, was just enough to make sure that Jace was never harmed. And the last bomb that I picked is Tekuthal Inquiry Dominus. That's a 4 mana, 2 blue. Legendary creature, Phyrexian Horror with flying. It's a 3/5 with flying for 4 mana, which is already a good thing. If you would proliferate twice, and then for 1 blue Phyrexian, so you can do 1 and 4 life, or just 3 mana. You can remove 3 counters from among other artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers you control. Put an indestructible counter on Tekuthal Inquiry Dominus. I don't know. I mean, if the indestructibility is going to be that essential, but the threat of activation of indestructible is quite important. Because I think that, how is this card going to be dealt with? Well, it's either going to be killed with an exile removal, and that's, the most common, I guess, way of removal, or it's going to be pacified or charmed sleeped. Neither of those things care about indestructibility. Indestructibility is only important in combat and with couple of really burn spells. But the irony, of course, the red spell that deals 5 damage at uncommon also removes indestructibility. So again, it doesn't work that much. So I guess that you're going to keep up the 1 mana to make sure that you can give it indestructibility when you want it, but you just don't want to do it proactively, I think, unless you really, really want to. Because you're going to just block smaller things with it. And yes, you can proliferate the indestructible counter. Right, but bombs are boring. Let's look at the universal cards. And I think that an important card in this format is Bring the Ending, independent of the deck, really. Of course, it's going to be better if you can get Corrupted. Bring the Ending, obviously, 1 and a blue for an instant, counter target spell until its controller pays 2. Corrupted, counter that spell instead if its controller has 3 or more poison counters. So it becomes like a 1 and a blue counter spell if you have Corrupted. I think that this card is going to be important at the beginning because it's sort of like a 2-drop, because it can counter their 2-drop. So that's fine. You trade on board presence. You manage to keep opponent in check. But if you move later to the game, if they play something like the White Sun's Twilight for 7 mana, very rarely they will have 2 mana to pay. So even without the Corrupted, it's going to be good enough to counter. If you're planning for a really long game, then you have to make sure that you get Corrupted at some stage, because that's the way that this card scales with the game. If it can become a solid counter spell at some stage, you're in the money. And I think that every blue deck is going to want at least a copy, if not 2, of that card. So I think it's quite good, an early pick in the first pack, because it keeps you open to other combinations of blue, because this card is going to be good. Experimental Augury, I think one of the most important blue cards from what I saw. This thing just has so many synergies. This is the golden egg of the format, in my opinion, for blue only, but okay. It's a 2 mana, 1 and a blue instant. Look at top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest of them on the bottom of your library in any order, and then you proliferate. So first of all, it digs for things, either answers or threats. I think that this format has some really strong bombs. So if you have them in your deck, you want Experimental Augury to dig for them. Proliferate is a nice addition because it will either do some poison damage or it will put oil counters, which are quite popular in blue. I think very important. And the third card that I put in the universal category is the Gitaxian Raptor. 3 mana, 1/4 with flying, enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it. You can remove an oil counter from it, and it gets +1, -1 until end of turn. So sort of Mistwalker, but you can activate it for free, but you can activate only a couple of times. I think 4 toughness is a really strong ability in this format. You drop it on 3, it can deal with those raptors in white, any other flyers. It blocks very well, or the X1 creatures, which are also quite some few. It definitely blocks well the 2/2s, so it deals with a lot of things. And with the 3/3, it can just block until cows come home and neutralize the threat like this. Um, Also, like a good target for proliferating because you will have that tagged along to cards at random, and therefore they will just make the raptor quite useful. And at some stage it can turn sideways and deal 4 damage if you're in a position where that's going to be important. I think a solid card, the 4 toughness and flying for 3 mana is going to be very useful in many games. In terms of top commons, I think that I'm looking at mesmerizing those as the top blue common in terms of the win rate, and I am not a fan of Charmed Sleep. Mesmerizing those is 1 blue enchantment aura, enchant creature. When it ETBs, tap the enchanted creature, and then you proliferate. Enchantment creature doesn't untap during its controller untap phase. So sort of Charmed Sleep version, but it has proliferate on top of everything, which makes it strictly better than Charm Sleep. And I think that combination of this extra proliferate tagged along and and the fact that there are not so many ways of dealing with enchanted creatures, sacrificing them or destroying the enchantment, that's going to tilt this card into being better than the previous formats. Because I think that there's very few effects that will deal with the enchantments in the format, and that's useful. Not so many things to bounce your own stuff, not so many things to blink your own stuff. So you should be good while playing that. You can sort of treat it like 90% of a solid removal, which is good for blue. Bring the Ending, the counterspell, as I already said. I think that the card is strong and should be played in every blue deck. And the third one that I picked is the Malcator's Watcher. And this shows that I don't think that blue commons are particularly strong. Maybe I should have put the Gitaxian Raptor in there as the 1/4 that I mentioned in the previous slide, but I decided to put some card that is not on the list, not to have this universal cards and top commons completely overlapping. I think Malcator's Watcher is a tool of prolonging games, and I think that blue very often will want to prolong the games because I think that if the commons in blue are not particularly strong, you probably want to play blue because you have bombs. And I think that blue is going to be a fine shell for decks that want to prolong the game, and by prolonging the game, give yourselves a lot of time to find the bombs, especially that you have the experimental augury that will dig for those bombs because it looks at top 3 cards of your library. And then, of course, the bombs can be in blue or in the other color that you picked. I think that there's enough fixing that maybe you can splash for bombs. But of course, keep in mind, only the ones that are really powerful. In terms of uncommons, I think that these 3 cards look like they stand out to me. First one is Tamiyo's Immobilizer, 4 mana artifact, ETBs with 4 oil counters, and you can tap and remove an oil counter from it and tap target artifact or creature. So sort of Icy Manipulator for free, but with the best before date because it runs out of the oil counters. I think that Proliferate is tagged on sufficient amount of cards in blue to have it being useful for more than 4 times that it originally starts with. But when you think about it, when you played Icy Manipulator, you rarely used it more than 4 times because it usually took over the game and you were able to win. So hopefully that's enough. Another card that I like in this, and maybe not in every shell, but I think it's going to be powerful because if people put it, they have the right shell. That's why I put it in my top uncommons bracket. Uh, This is the Unctus Retrofitter, a 3 mana 2/3 with Toxic 1 for I don't know what reason. When it ETBs, sorry, when it ETBs up to one target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/4 for as long as this thing remains on the battlefield. I played it in the pre-release. It was really great. You have those skull bombs, the 1 mana artifacts that you can turn into 4/4s. You have a couple of creatures that are artifacts that you can turn into 4/4s. There's plenty of targets for it, and you know 6-7 stats for 3 mana is a pretty decent deal. So even though you kill the 2/3, the whole thing um, disentangles quite easily. I think that still it's quite a powerful combination, and I am modestly convinced that the retrofitter is not going to go too early, so you might have a chance of getting a couple of those when you are in the right lane. So yeah, I think it's going to be high on the uncommon win rate list because it's going to be played only in the decks that want it. Then we have Troller Drake. I'm really excited about this card. It's a 3 mana 0/0 with flying, but of course it can't be 0/0. So it comes with an oil counter, um, and it gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. So I see the pattern of playing this on turn 3 if you don't play black against the black deck, and then on turn 4 you can cast a spell, maybe even a spell of proliferate, and make it bigger and make it into a 3/3 if you proliferate it as well. Um, and from then on it starts growing and becoming this sort of like a weirdly analogous creature to the levitating statue from Brothers War. So yeah, I'm quite excited about playing this card. Uh, Black. The bombs, we have Vraska, a 6 mana, or actually 4 black and Phyrexian black. Planeswalker comes with 6 counters, or 4 if you played if you paid the completed Phyrexian mana cost. 0 mana, you draw a card. 0 loyalty counters, you draw a card, and you lose 1 life, and then you proliferate. So that's the sort of only way of growing it. -2, target creature becomes a treasure. So this is like Minimus Containment from the AFR, which was a bad spell. But the problem with Minimus Containment was that you played it early, and if you played it early, it gave like the treasure that was quite useful to someone. Also, you could destroy Minimus Containment if you wanted, and then the creature just came back. So this one is going to be late because you play Vraska only later, and also the ramping is not that useful because you can use this thing multiple times. I think that's a dope ability for the Planeswalker, and it has an ultimate that sort of turns your opponent's toxic count to 9, and so you're just one shot away, one extra activation of Vraska next turn, and they are dead. Obviously, this is a classic Planeswalker design. Draw a card, deal with a creature, ultimate win the game. So it's going to be good for sure. Then there's the Archfiend of the Dross, a card that you know, I think is going to be very powerful. It's a 4-mana 6/6 flyer. Comes with a drawback. It enters with foil or counters, and every upkeep you remove one of those. If you remove the last one, you lose the game. But it also has an upside. Whenever a creature an opponent control dies, its controller loses 2 life. So this thing goes in on the upkeep. You remove a counter from its swing. Next upkeep, you remove the second one, swing. Next upkeep, you remove the third one, swing. And next upkeep, you remove the fourth one and die. But if you proliferate once within that time, or if they lost a couple of creatures, they might be dead by then. And I think that, yeah, this is going to work like that, that it's going to kill quite a lot. I did already see a game where a person managed only to get 19 damage in, and then had to remove the last counter from Archfiend of Dross. But there are ways of there are actual ways of hedging your bets with this card. You can put a bounce spell and return it when it goes low on oil counters. You can proliferate a couple of times to make sure more damage goes in. So there is technology. Just be careful because pacifism on this one is going to be uh, probably lethal for you. So you have to make sure that you have ways of dealing with that kind of spell in one way or the other. Black Sun Twilight, I picked it on the bombs. That's a card is just way below those first two, but still quite powerful. It's a X and black. Up to one target creature gets minus X until end of turn. So actually works nicely with those indestructible things and killing them. But if X is 5 or more, so if you paid 6 mana or more on the spell, you may also return a creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is another card that I think has some utility early in the game, but you're always one step behind because the 3/3 should have a 3 mana creature should have 3/3. Well, to kill a 3/3, you need to spend 4 mana with this, so you're slightly behind on mana. So I would probably want to cast it for 6 or more mana and get something out of the graveyard, which also means that if I play it, I won't have ways of looting or rummaging that put big things for the Black Sun's Twilight into the graveyard. Universal cards. I never said that they have to be commons. I picked Ambulatory Edifice as one of my universal cards. I think that this card is going to be great. 3 mana artifact creature, Phyrexian Construct for a 3/2. And when it ETBs, you may pay 2 life when you do. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. It's great to clear a blocker. It's great to play it after attacks to remove a creature that was dealt damage earlier. It leaves behind a body that is, threatening to trade with something. Just good a card. 2/2 Bebo. I don't know if it's a consensus that format is going to be aggressive. I think that there are things that point to the fact that this format is going to be fast. Because if you play Toxic, you have sort of less damage to be dealt with. Most of the creatures give relatively more damage in poison counters than in actual damage. So these creatures are going to, push you towards the plan that involves killing with poison. And if you go towards that plan, those games can be quite quick. So there is a chance that the format is going to be very fast. But on the other hand, it also has bombs that can basically stop the game and stall it on their own, which it's sort of fighting each other, those two possibilities of this being a fast format and being slightly more grindy. If I was a betting person, I would have bet it's going to be fast, but not lightning fast. Okay, second universal black card, Anoint with Affliction. 2 mana instant, exile target creature if it has mana value 3 or less, and with Corrupted, it just exiles any creature. So yeah, I think that the card is good even if you're not Corrupted, because just a 2 mana kill a 3-drop, which makes you ahead of mana. It also exiles it, which is great. So that's fine. And if you get Corrupted, this is busted because it's basically a better terror if you have Corrupted, which is great. And I think weirdly, a universal card that is not going to be something that you want to prioritize, but it's something that you probably are quite keen on sneaking in as a 22nd, 23rd playable, is Testament Bearer, 4 mana, 4/1. When it dies, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So it gives you quite a lot of selection when it dies. And 4/1, this is not a great aggressive body. This is a great defensive body. It trades with a lot of stuff that is much bigger. So it can be a good defensive card when you play this and they are afraid of attacking with large creatures. And if you have something that can block small creatures very well, they are sort of in a limbo at that time, and they either have to force it, sort of like a standstill situation when them attacking means that you draw a card with quite a good selection, or they will stop, which is good for your plan because I assume that this is going to be in those slower leaning black decks. So maybe the Testament Bearer is not going to be in every single build because I think that there will be a couple of ultra aggressive toxic decks when it's not going to be great. But apart from that, it's going to be doing, I think, a decent job in slowing the game down, which is exactly what you want in the decks that are slightly controlling. And this format, I promise, I'm going to look at the data on the speed of the format and which cards are slowing it down the most. So hopefully we can make a sort of like a rudimentary calculator when you can put in your deck into it, and if you do, it spits out whether your deck wants to be on the play or on the draw, which I think is a cool feature, that using data you can figure out if you want to be on the play or on the draw, based on what cards are inside rather than based on historical performance of that particular deck. Um, Top commons. Anoint with Affliction, we mentioned the exile target creature with mana value 3 or less. I think that's going to be a very much the highest common, not only because the card is good, but if you have multiples of that, it means that black is wide open, which of course means that your deck is probably going to be good because you have a large card selection. Um, then I put Blightbelly Rat, the 2 mana 2/2 with Toxic 1, and when it dies, Proliferate. I think that it's important because it really can deal normal toxic damage. When it dies, it can put counters on other things. But importantly, you can get into a situation in games where an opponent is not like 8 poison and you have this, and maybe you have another one in your deck, and you know that this sort of gives you inevitability that at certain stage you play those rats, you swing with them, and they either block and kill them and you proliferate the toxic, or they don't block it and you just put poison counters on them, and yeah, and they're dead. And I put Offer Immortality as one of the top commons. I don't think it is a card that is the strongest card in black, but I think that this, like some cards I mentioned before, is going to be mainly played by people that know what they're doing. I think that this trick is really excellent in decks that want to kill with Toxic, and it has a couple of mini combos. I already told you the dual double strike creature is going to be great with Offer Immortality when they try to double block it. Um, but also menacing 2/4 for 4 mana is going to be great with Offer Immortality because again, you survive, you trade Offer Immortality, and they lose to creatures. So a great situation for you. And I think that in the beginning there's going to be people that know how to use it. I think that this is the prime, probably. Okay, this is my hot take now. I think that this is the best combat trick for the decks that want to kill with Toxic, because it keeps your board and it kills their creature. And how you win with Toxic is that you have more attackers than they have blockers, and you manage to push poison damage. This does exactly this while still costing not enough mana, little low enough amount of mana that you actually might cast a creature on top of playing that trick, and therefore further increase your board presence and make next attacks strong. Uncommons, I think that Bilious Skull Dweller is going to be a grown test in the format. It's going to be like when you're on the draw and your opponent plays this on turn 1, you're going to be like, because this card is essential for many things, including turning on Corrupt early, including decks that want to kill with poisons are going to be really much needing it. But it's also not a bad top deck later in the game because it's a 1 mana Death Toucher at that stage. So, yeah, I think that this card is going to be pretty useful. Ambulatory Edifice, I think that this card is excellent. Again, clear the blocks or play it post combat to kill something bigger that got almost lethal but not quite. Or just a 3/2 if you really don't have any targets for it, which is fine. It's not the end of the stream, Zach. We're just basically finishing the colors. We still have all the color pairs. And then the last card that I think in top uncommons in black, Drown in Ichor. 2 mana, target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn and proliferate. Cheap removal that also proliferates. I think that covers most of the plans of black. And rate on this is really good. Shame you cannot use it at instant speed, but let's not exaggerate about wanting more from a card like that already. Red. The bombs, I selected 3 cards. Dragonwing Glider, I think that's the most straightforward bomb in the format. 5 mana for Mirrodin ability, so it makes a 2/2 when it ETBs, and that 2/2 gets equipped with +2/+2 flying haste. So it's a 4/4 flying haste dragon, basically, for 5 mana. I think that this is the saddest moment for that because every red deck will want it, so the white and red are not going to see much of it. But but hey, what can you do? Um, Card powerful just on rate. Later you can move this equipment to something else for 5 mana, making evasive, big, hasty threat. So yeah, great in every deck really that has red. Urabrask's Forge card that I had in my pool in pre-release, and I loved it. It's just so great. So it's a 3 mana artifact at the beginning of combat on your turn. You put an oil counter on it. Then you create an X1 Phyrexian Horror with Trample and Haste, where X is the number of counters on Urabrask's Forge. So basically, on turn one, it makes a 1/1 instantly with Haste, then 2/1, 3/1, 4/1. But very often you're going to proliferate, and because you proliferate, it accelerates it. It very quickly wins races because the fact that your creatures are growing every turn and that you don't need to commit anything except for this disposable token that will die at the end of turn anyway means that you can do the rest, uh, focus on the defensive by the other cards. And yeah, the trample on that is just sick. Like very few things hose it. I mean, of course, you can destroy an artifact, and if the opponent plays something that has first strike, it's a problem. But luckily, most of the things with first strike only have first strike on the turn of the player, so there's not much that can be done with it. It's really great. It very quickly takes over games, and indeed, I didn't lose a game when I played it during the pre-release because it very quickly overtook it. And again, I played things in blue that had proliferate, which made it grow way faster than you think. And in 4 turns, instead of making a 4/1, I was making a 6 or a 7/1, and that becomes a problem. And the last one, Solfim Mayhem Dominus, also had it in my pre-release. I think it's okay. It's not like super great, but I couldn't decide about any other card in the red that was really looking like a bomb. I think that red is more powerful at common and uncommon level, and there's not so many like super strong bomb, but there's good cards in that. And Solfim is a 4 mana 5/4, which is always good. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. Sort of, yes, Bibo. I'm bragging about my pretty spools, but I understand those cards better, so I can evaluate them better because I had experience with them. Um, So this thing is a bomb, sort of synergy bomb, because it works very well with the 1/1 haste creature that pings for 1, because now it pings for 2. It works very well with the burn spells. 1 mana spell can deal 8 damage when it's on board, which is quite insane when you think about it. If it targets a creature with toxic. And the 3 mana burn spell at common goes face, so that can go 6 damage to the face, which is pretty good. Again, I wouldn't put indestructible on it automatically. I would probably try to use it as per need, because there's so many things that can deal with the indestructible. Yes, Volt Charge. That's the one that goes face quite efficiently. And yeah, especially the pinging creature is really good with it, because pinging for 2 is just way better than pinging for 1 in the face. That ends games very quickly. The universal cards in this in red, I think that Hex Gold Slash, the 1 mana deals 2 damage to target creature, or 4 to the creature with toxic. That's going to be an absolutely essential card in red, because this is your insurance policy against getting overrun with poison very quickly, or making sure that opponent doesn't get corrupted too early. Then I picked Blazing Crescendo, which might be a tricky choice, but I think all red decks don't care about killing with poison, and therefore they care about killing with damage. This pushes 3 damage and sometimes makes you win combat instead of trading. And also, exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. If your mana curve is low, on turn 3, you can convincingly play it and make sure that everything that you hit from that is going to be a card draw, which makes it really close to 2 mana +3/+1 draw a card, which is really a good rate. So I think it's going to be on plan and powerful in this particular color. So I think that's going to be quite universally good in the decks if you play it skillfully. And Volt Charge, I think that it's going to be universal because it's just the best common removal that Red has in this format, and it's quite powerful. I mean, okay, not the best. I think that Hexagold Slash is actually going to be more important, but Volt Charge has some diversity, some versatility because it can also go to face. The Proliferate maybe is not nothing. In terms of top common, not much changes here. I still have Hexagold Slash and Volt Charge. I think that these cards are going to be absolutely crucial to play in your red decks. Uh, and I only exchanged the Blazing Crescendo with the Soulblade Scamp because I think that this card is going to be extremely powerful in a particular deck. I think that this deck is going to have as many Soulblade Scamps as you physically can. And that's how you will want to kill, because the fact that you can only use it once a turn is a bit of a bummer, but on the other hand, you can put multiple oil counters on it every turn, and if you have some other defensive cards and maybe some removal, you are going to be able to survive the game quite long, to the moment where Soulblade Scamp is going to be a prime target for removal. And if you're in a situation that the opponent uses a proper removal to kill Soulblade Scamp, you know that you're winning. In terms of uncommons, I picked one card that is clearly powerful in Rebel Salvo, the 3 mana deal 5 damage to any creature or planeswalker. That permanent loses indestructible until end of turn. Also, weirdly, affinity for equipment, so it might actually cost 2 or 1, which is sick rate. And apart from that, I picked one creature that I think is probably more powerful than we think. So the Furnace Punisher, that's a 3 mana 3/3 menace creature. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 2 damage to that player unless they control 2 or more basic lands. I think that most people treat this as a vanilla, sort of French vanilla 3/3 menace for 3 mana, which is good, but I think it's going to deal 2 damage more frequently than you think when you're on the play, especially when you're on the play. Because people will play spheres, play them on turn 1 tapped. If you play that on turn 3, it will always ping them for 1. So that's an extra value that it will generate, probably some amount of time at least. And then Churning Reservoir, I think that this card is going to be in top uncommon because people that are going to play it will know what they want to do with it. It's a 1 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on another target non-token per artifact or creature you control. I think that this is going to be the glue for any decks that focus on oil, namely red, green, and red, blue. But it's going to be very good in those decks. And then you have 2 mana tap and to create a 1/1 Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Activate only if an oil counter was removed from a permanent you control this turn, or a permanent with an oil counter on it was put into a graveyard this turn. So very often it will create those kind of situations when you put a counter on the scamp, tap the scamp to ping the opponent, then make a 1/1 and sort of like nickel and dime kind of value engine. But at the same time, it will be good with enabling some cards that are pretty strong in with oil synergies, like the oil Flametongue Cup with the 4 mana creature that deals as much damage as you have other permanents with oil counters on them. Okay, green bombs. Nissa, Descended Animists. 3 green, green, Phyrexian green, Phyrexian green. Lots of symbols. But yeah, I mean, it's either 7 or 6 or 5, and either 7, 5, or 3 loyalty counters. +1, create an XX green Phyrexian horror creature token where X is Nissa's loyalty. So, if you play it at 7, you plus Nissa, you make an 8/8. If Nissa is at 3, you plus her, you get a 4/4, and they stay like that until the end of their miserable lives. You can -1 it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Pretty useful ability to have. I don't think this is the best thing about Nissa, but it's nice to have it. And then -7, so you can ultimate it when you played it for 7 mana. Until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 for each forest you control and gain trample, which most likely means that if you played it for 7 mana, you needed 4 green, so at least +4/+4 trample, if not more, which is a house. It makes it not like something between Overrun and Craterhoof Behemoth. Then there is the WTF card of the set in Thrun, Breaker of Silence, 3 green. Um, Legendary creature, Troll Shaman, can't be countered. It has trample. Can't be target of non-green spells your opponents control or abilities from non-green sources your opponents control. Why? As long as it's your turn, Thrun has indestructible. This card is going to be annoying. It shouldn't be in the set. There's no point of having it. You can make a different card, uh, put it in a commander set, and give us some card that you can interact with. The fact is that the card is just blanked by a 6/6. There's not many 6/6s in this format. There's very few. There's two at uncommon. There's zero at common of 6 toughness creatures. So you can't block it. You can't interact with it unless you are in green and have like a fight spell that can deal with it. It's just miserable. You can't even counter it, Like normally those things, at least you keep like, no, well, at least I put some counters in my deck. So there's nothing you can do. And these cards become progressively worse when you play like 8 round sealed deck tournaments, because I can guarantee you that if there's going to be like a GP style event, a lot of top tables are going to have Thrun in their pools, and it's going to be miserable for everyone because you have this thing that you can't interact with it. It maybe is not as atrocious as Dream Trawler from Theros Beyond Death, but it's not far from it. So yeah, as Kamal said, 1/1 death touch to the rescue. And yet again, reason while the death touch, yeah, exactly. Well, they have to block it. There is nothing you can do about this card, barring the fight spells, and that's it. Or a 6/6. So, if you're planning to go long on a GP style sealed deck event, make sure that you put a 6/6 in your deck. Yeah, chumping works to some extent, but it's also not great. So yeah, Thran is going to be a miserable card. I don't think that kind of design should be made. It's just not like I will play with it when I draft it, but will I feel great about winning with my opponents by playing Thran that they cannot do? I don't know. Tyrannox Rex, the last bomb, 4 green. This spell can't be countered again. Um, Trample, word 4, haste, toxic 4. That's just a rate monster. But this card is strong, but you can deal with it at least. Word 4, yes, it's annoying, but for 6 mana, you can kill it with a 2 mana removal. That's fine. It will do its first damage, that's for sure. It has trample, so it deals 4 toxic damage, almost guaranteed. But you can deal with it somehow. So much better card than Thrawn in terms of design. Annoying, powerful, but it won't bring those kind of moments when you just feel bad about yourself. Okay, green universal cards. I think that Armored Scrap Gorger is going to be pretty strong. That's a 2 mana, 1 in green, 03 Phyrexian Beast. It gets +3/+0 as long as it has 3 or more oil counters on it. You can tap it for mana of any color, and whenever it becomes tapped, exile target card from a graveyard and put an oil counter on Armored Scrap Gorger. It's a weird situation because you have to exile a card, if I'm not mistaken, when you tap it. It's not a May ability, so you might be forced to exile your own card. So make sure that you don't use it when the only card in the graveyard is the Flashback Beastmaker. because you will exile it and lose value on your own. And also, it won't get oil counters unless you exile. So I think that it's not going to be like super quick to be a 3/3. Still, it ramps you, and I think that green wants to play some of the more expensive things. Um, so yeah, it's good to ramp you into a 4 drop, into a 5 drop. It's pretty useful. And the fact that it turns into a 3/3 creature at some stage, and the fact that it limits the graveyard of the opponent is another asset. So yeah, all together, like the card does everything that you want. Also, in a format with plenty of bombs, being able to splash some of them is quite useful. So Armored Scrap Gorger is going to make that. Contagious Vorak, that's a 3 mana 3/3. When it ETBs, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may pick a land from those cards. If you do, you put it in your hand. But if you don't, and you can always choose if you want to do it or don't, you proliferate. So either way, it does something. Um, Worst case scenario, you miss on the land and you don't have anything to proliferate. Well, sucks to be you then, but probably 95% of the time, it will do something that you want to. And Canker Bloom, that's a fungus for 1 and a green. It's a 3/2 for 1 and a green, which is why I put it on this list. But it also has useful abilities for this format. You can sacrifice it to destroy target artifact, you can sacrifice it to destroy target enchantment, or you can sacrifice it to proliferate. And I think that the first two are going to be used quite a lot of time proactively to get rid of like some really annoying enchantment or artifact. And the last one is going to be done opportunistically. If you have 1 mana left and someone kills Canker Bloom, you just sack it to proliferate because that's better than someone killing it. So yeah, solid creature and altogether. And I think because of that, it will fit to any kind of green deck. I think that in this format, it would have actually been better if it was a 2/3 than a 3/2, but that's a different story. Top commons, according to me, Ruthless Predation, that's a target creature you control gets +1/+2 until end of turn and it fights. It's for 1 and a green. I think just a solid removal. Cheap enough that it can allow pushing it and pushing damage and double spelling at the same time. So I think it's going to be quite strong, especially in the decks that focus on toxic kills in green. Then Contagious Vorak, because that's just very good card on rate. However, it does suffer from a problem of not being on the plan of toxic decks, which I think will make it slightly better in something like red green when you want to focus on oil counters, and that proliferate might be useful than in toxic decks where well, maybe you proliferate 1 poison counter, but that's about it. Then I have Tyrannex Atrocity. I think that this card, at least initially, is going to have high win rate. It's a 5 mana 4/4 with haste and toxic 3. And I think that haste toxic 3, at least at the beginning of the format, is going to be quite useful because people will not play around it sufficiently and you will be able to push quite a lot of damage. Uncommons, I put the Armored Scrap Gorger, the 0/3 that gives mana on that list. Evolving Adaptive, I think that this card is going to be really strong in oil decks. It's a 1 mana 1. It's a 1 mana 0/0. Enters the battlefield with an oil counter, gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. And when another creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than the Evolving Adaptive, put in oil counter on Evolving Adaptive. So I can see it played on turn 1, played on turn 2, it becomes a 2. Play something on turn 2, it becomes a 2/2. Play something on turn 3, it becomes a 3/3. Grows very well with the game and is able to push quite a lot of damage through that. And viral spawning, the 3 mana, make a 3/3 beast with toxic 1. And if you have corrupted, you can flashback it. I think that this card is not built for killing with poison because it deals 3 damage but only 1 poison counter. But it's built to help you with getting the corrupted through and therefore helping casting the second half of its own self. So pretty useful, but I think that, yeah, again, the main plan of the decks that contain this card should be killing with damage. Right, this is all the 5 colors, and now we can go through all the archetypes very quickly. First, blue-white. I put key, but when I say key cards, I mean uncommons. When I put key commons, I mean commons. But I put the signpost of every archetype just for us to get an impression what it does. Blue white, the signpost is Cephalopod Sentry, two white and blue, artifact creature, Phyrexian squid with an X5. For some reason, as a squid, it flies. I'm not a macrobiologist, but I don't know much about flying squids. Um, it has power equal to the number of artifacts you control. And I think that, given the right deck, this can be quite big, quite quick, and people have to deal with it. And five toughness is quite a lot of defense power as well. So I don't think the card is going to be bad. I just think it's going to be the deck that it wants to be and will not come together very often. But you have to keep in mind you have some of the skull bombs that can sit on the battlefield until you need to sacrifice them that will boost the cephalopod sentry initially. You have some other good artifacts, and actually, all the key cards that I selected for that one are the artifacts because, as I said, I didn't select the cards that I think are the most powerful with raw power. I picked the ones that I think are important for playing around with the synergies of the particular color combination. So Cephalopod Sentry should be fine. I think that the most important cards in this archetype, for me at least, was Tamiyo's Immobilizer, the 4-mana Icy Manipulator variant with oil counters that disappear slowly as you use it, and Annex Sentry, the 3-mana 1/4 with Toxic 1. When it ETBs, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until it leaves the battlefield. But it's also an artifact creature, so all those things play well with this artifact synergy and are really powerful. Like Tamiyo's Immobilizer does exactly what I think this deck wants to do, and that is stalling while you attack with the flyers. Annex Sentry creates a really potent blocker, and at the same time deals with one of the potential attackers by exiling it, or deals with some annoying artifact. Annex Sentry very often will kill the Formirrodin 2/2 elf, and they will just die. Nothing that they can do will bring it back. So you're quite happy about it. Key commons. I put mesmerizing dose, the charm sleep variant, mainly because I think that the proliferate will be relatively useful for this deck. um, uh, not to push toxic because probably you want to win with damage in this thing. Um, but for oil counters, which are abundant on some blue spells, especially. Then Meldwood Strider. This is the card that I didn't think much of, but then Jason ILTG convinced me that this is the future of blue. It's a 5-mana vehicle, uh, 5/5 vigilance. When it enters the battlefield with an oil counter, and you can remove an oil counter from it for it to become a creature, and also has crew 3. So what Jason thinks about this card is that the 5/5 body is huge in this format, and he's right. um, and the ability of playing it and removing an oil counter from it to block is a useful skill to have, because you don't fall into that situation when you play a vehicle and then they just swing into you because you don't have any way of activating it on the first turn. But also, if you don't activate that oil on turn 1, you can proliferate the oil counters on it, and it becomes a really potent threat when you can do it once or twice, because that basically becomes a 5-mana 5/5 in blue with vigilance. So you can attack by crewing and then still have something to block, or attack by removing a counter, still have a creature to tap so that it can block, and the next turn you can proliferate again and repeat the whole process, which is pretty good in this deck that I think doesn't want to be super slow, but also cannot be super fast. So it basically wants to survive at least for some time and then take over the game and win. And the last key common, Mandible Justiciar. That's a 1 and a white 2/1 artifact creature, Phyrexian cleric with lifelink. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. I think that the combination of lifelink and being able to grow it is going to be great against some non-toxic dealing aggressive decks, and it's an artifact also, so it plays with synergies. Okay, White black. Key cards. Well, the signpost uncommon vivisection evangelist is 3 white black, vigilance 4/4, and it has corrupted when if opponent has 3 or more poison counters, when it ETBs, you destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. This card, obviously, if you have corrupted, is busted. It's 5 mana, 4/4 with vigilance, which is just below rate for that kind of ability, but it also kills the creature. So like this probably, if you would get the effects, it would probably be 4 mana for a vigilance, 4/4 plus 3 mana for the destroy creature or planeswalker. So you should play 7 mana for it. You get 5 because it has corrupted. So it's a really good deal if you can activate the corrupted. Now, of course, what it means for the thing is A, you want to have corrupted quite quickly, and B, because it's a 4/4 that doesn't have toxic, you want to play in the decks that their main plan is to get corrupted and then kill with normal damage. So keep that in mind. But of course, it's also going to be fine in a dedicated toxic deck because just removing a blocker and getting extra poison damage on board is good enough, and the 4/4 vigilance is equally good attacking as it is blocking. So keep that in mind. Because white black seems like it wants to have corrupted early, another card I picked was Belios Skull Dweller, the 1 mana 1/1 with Death Touch and Toxic. Obviously, it just is very quick and efficient way of dealing toxic. And I also put an Eccentric, the 1/4 that exiles something with mana value 3 or less. Again, it can clear the path to your. If you imagine playing turn 1 Bilious Skull Dweller, turn 2 Toxic Creature, turn 3 Annex Sentry, remove the only blocker swing. That means that the opponent is already on Corrupt and your Vivisection Evangelist on turn 5 is online to kill something. So it's great. I think that removing things off the way with Annex Sentry while putting a toxic body on board is excellent when your plan is to win with poison. Key commons. I picked Crawling Chorus. That's the 1 mana 1/1 with Toxic that leaves a Might behind. Flensing Raptor, 2/2 flying Toxic 1. ETBs. Another creature gets flying Toxic with Toxic gets flying and +1/+1. Again, excellent in pushing some small amount of toxic damage, which means it's great in activating Corrupted, but will also play well if your deck wants to be going for the full toxic kill. And I think that both of those decks will be available in the white black. And Annoyed with Affliction, I think that this is extremely important to play because that's like the only common removal that can deal with larger stuff, and you have quite ease of activating it, which means that it should be online in most of the games. Okay, white red key cards. The signpost uncommon is the Bladehold War Whip, 1 red white equipment with 4 Mirrodin, which makes a 2/2 rebel red rebel creature and attaches it to it. Equip abilities you activate of other equipment cost 1 less to activate. Equipped creature has double strike. 3 mana double striker, 2/2 double striker is good. In white red, you probably will have other equipment. So there is a trinket text of those things costing less to equip. So I guess fine. But just the 2/2 double striker is pretty useful. You can play quite a lot of combat tricks, which unfortunately don't give trample, but still. So you can get extra value out of certain things. Then Bladed Ambassador, I think that this card is particularly good in white red because it doesn't have any toxic synergies and the card looks good on raid. So I think that this is going to be the exactly best house for that card. It's a 1 and a white 3/1 that enters the battlefield with an oil counter, and you can pay 1 mana and remove the oil counter from it, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. I think that this is exactly the place where you want to have that card. Hopefully, initially people probably are going to over pick it for cards that care about toxic, but hopefully as the season matures, format matures, this is going to be like a reward for being in white red when you're going to get those things passed because no other white deck is interested in having them. But I might be wrong. I mean, hope stays. And another card that I picked is Against All Odds, the 4 mana sorcery. You can choose one or both. Either exile artifact or creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, or return target artifact or creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it does two things. A, it can blink an equipment and create another 2/2, or blink something for like a strong effect. And you can return something from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's like if you play it well, it's a natural 2/1. Um, so yeah, that's um, that's that's how I see this card being slightly more useful in white red than in any other format. Key commons. I think Hex Gold Slash is going to be absolutely crucial because you have some value in your white and red cards, but if a deck with lots of corrupted will activate corrupted, they will outvalue it because they get those extra things that they get from the activation of corrupted. And I think Hex Gold Slash is one of the most potent tools in your arsenal against speedy toxic openings of opponents. So it's important to have that card. Barb Butterfist is, I think, essential because obviously you want to have some equipment in your equipment deck. I mean, and it's a solid air drop. Also, if you are pushed by toxic creatures, 3 power in defense is pretty useful. And if the creature dies, maybe that barbed Butterfist equipment can be useful on some other creature. Another card that I picked here, I don't know if it's going to be strong, but I think it's looks quite key, and it looks like quite solid actually. It's the 3 and a red Chimney Rebel. It's a 3 and a red creature, Phyrexian and Goblin Warrior. It's a 3/3 with haste, and at DB it makes a 1/1 Phyrexian and Goblin creature token. So like an improvement of lots of those white things that were I make a 3/3 and a 1/1. This one makes a hasty 3/3 and a 1/1 because it makes two bodies. It's good when you have power boosting equipment in your deck. Okay. White and green key cards. The signpost is Slaughter Singer, green white for a Phyrexian Cleric, 2/2 with Toxic 2. Whenever another creature you control with Toxic attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And this, again, looking at this card, it means that every creature with Toxic that you have is becoming better at dealing face damage. This makes me think that white green does not want to kill with poison if you have this Slaughter Singers in your deck. That means that white green wants to possibly build corrupted. That's why you need the toxic for, but it actually wants to kill with face damage. Because they become bigger. They your 2/2 toxic one now deals 3 damage and one poison counter, which means that it will kill within 7 attacks with face damage and with 10 attacks with poison counters. So yeah, much quicker to kill with damage in this way. But you can benefit from all the payouts from corrupted. So because that's the case, so you want to have toxic creatures in your deck, but you want to kill with face damage. I think Porcelain Zealot is secretly a white green card. This one is a 4 mana, 3 and a white, 2/3 Phyrexian Soldier. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. But if that creature has Toxic, instead it gets +2/+2 until end of turn, which means that it further boosts those toxic creatures to give them even more power, so you can have those toxic creatures and push actual face damage with them, while the opponent will very often, at least in the early format, I think that lots of people will be thinking about toxic way too much and forgetting that they only have 20 life to spare. And again, because you want to kill with damage, I think that Tyver Stand is going to be great in this format. Tyver Stand being a one with X and green instant. Target creature you control gets +X/+X, gains haste proof and indestructible until end of turn. The +X/+X on one unblocked creature is going to be a house if you are planning to kill with damage. And in some situations, you just play it for one green to give hexproof and indestructible to some creature until end of turn. So a dual combat trick that can both push damage and protect your creature from dying. Um, So because you don't want to kill with poison, but you are in a very good position of having corrupted, I think that Incisor Glider is going to be great in the white green archetype, because it will be online relatively quickly. And when it's online, it becomes a 2/4 flyer on your turn, and you should be aggressive so you don't care that much about blocking. It will be 2/4 flyer on your turn, and it will pump the rest of your team, therefore pushing even more damage. So, across the Incisor Glider, Porcelain Zealot, and Slaughter Singer, you have multiple ways of boosting your other creatures and pushing face damage. Now, obviously, Contagious Vorak is going to be quite useful because it can ramp you to the bigger green spells, or it can proliferate the poison counters to get you through to the corrupted zone, and therefore getting the benefits of your corrupted cards. And the other card I put on the list here is Mace Scalbum, because it can be used again as a dual trick to push the face damage. +3/+3 and trample is hell of a lot of damage that you push, even if you play that on sorcery. I told you there's not like 6/6s flying around in this format too often. Still, you draw a card, but also when you play it on like a 2/2 toxic 1 creature, and will become a 5/5 with trample, which means that most likely it will deal that toxic damage. So you can use it to push this one damage that makes you cross that threshold of corrupted. Yeah, Alex Canada. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. Right, blue black key cards. So the signpost is a blue and black 2/1 flyer. The 2/1 flyer for 2 mana is already good. It has Toxic 1, and whenever you proliferate, you may return it from your graveyard to your hand. So I guess that the plan for blue black is sort of nickel and diming the opponent with some small toxic. And I think that in the end, you probably want to kill with that toxic, but not necessarily through the attack, but maybe with the help of some proliferate. Um, so, Voidwing Hybrid maybe will swing 3 times, deal 6 damage, 3 poison counters. You have your Corrupted activated, so you can get some payoffs from that. Then you play some defensive creature, and then like you play Drown and Ichor and proliferate the poison counters from the opponent. Maybe you play Thrumming Bird, 1/1 that proliferates on connection, and this thing sort of boosts your poison count. Also, can actually bring Voidwing Hybrid out of graveyard to your hand if it's there, if the opponent had any poison counters. So yeah, Drown and Ichor does proliferate again. And that's why in commons I put a couple of cards. One is Experimental Augury, to look for things and to proliferate, because you are having this sort of mini proliferate plan. And weirdly, I put Sheoldred's Head Cleaver. That's a 4 mana, so 3 and a black, 2/4 with Menace and Toxic 2. And I mainly put it because I think that if blue black wants to play sort of attrition game, then the 2/4 menacing creature becomes a bigger problem to be blocked, because you can have a lot of removal. You can deal with the creatures of the opponent, and maybe that Sheoldred's Head Cleaver will have a shot of getting through more frequently than it normally would. And then, of course, if you play a couple of Sheoldred's Head Cleavers, the combat trick that gives Indestructible and Death Touch becomes a much better thing in your deck, because because it needs to be double blocked, and if they double block it and you play that trick, oh my god, that's perfect for an attrition based deck. And also, Toxic 2 kills pretty quickly, especially when you have a couple of proliferates here and there. So it's not going to be bad. I think that this is probably the prime archetype for that card in my head, at least originally. And I don't know, I have a weird feeling that this card is going to be slightly better than we think, because 4 toughness is a lot, and Toxic 2 is also a lot, and Menace with the Indestructible trick is scary. And I think Whisper of the Dross is also decent. Deals with early threats, but also proliferates in the later game, so it's not completely useless even later. Also, can win some combats as a combat trick that gives -1/-1 at some stage. So, like, very versatile card that promotes the plan that you might be having with this archetype. Blue red. Key cards. Well, the Signpost and Commons Serum Core Chimera as a 2 blue and red for a Phyrexian Chimera, 2/4 flyer. Whenever you cast a non creature spell, put an oil counter on it, and you can remove 3 oil counters from Serum Core Chimera. Draw a card, then you may discard a non land card. When you discard a card this way, Serum Core Chimera deals 3 damage to target creature on Planeswalker. Arguably, note to face. So yeah, I mean, it's a solid kind of payoff. I don't know if the 2/4 body is just big enough, so I don't know if it's gonna be good. Ability is okay, but 4-drop, it might be actually not good enough to be an important player. But what I think that this archetype will really heavily lean on oil and on casting non-creature spells. So I think Churning Reservoir is going to be pretty decent. That's a 1 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on another target non-token artifact or creature you control. Tap to create a 1/1 goblin if you removed oil from something, or if a creature with oil died this turn under your control. So this will be like a very versatile tool to put extra counters on things like Serum Core Chimera, on things like Troller Drake, on things like the Icy Manipulator. Lots of those cards will benefit from having extra counters, and Churning Reservoir is going to do that, while also providing you with creatures on occasions. I've seen it work in the hands of streamers. I think just Lolaman was playing it, and it just looks lovely when he was distributing those counters, getting the Flametongue Cavul to deal 4 damage to face, getting the Icy Manipulator to work multiple turns more than it was designed to work originally. So yeah, pretty useful glue piece for the kind of deck. And I think it might have the same role in the red green. So I think the card is a good glue piece. It's a thing that, doesn't do anything spectacular, but it does quite a lot of little things that will help you. And then it's Troller Drake. I think that we already mentioned it. It's the one that gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. It gets really good with things like Charming Reservoir. It gets also really good with things that proliferate. So generally, I think, and you will be wanting to cast a lot of non-creature spells anyway. So it's like very much on plan for the deck. And the key commons they identified. I talked about it last week already in depth. How do I see blue red? But for me, the versions I want to try building, and I'm not sure if they're going to be good, but these are the ones that I want to be good, are the ones that are built around Icarus Synthesizer, the 2 mana 1/3 that when it gets 4 oil counters or more is a 3/3 unblockable. And try to build some kind of tempo strategy. However, after the pre-release, I was very impressed by the Sawblade Scamp, so I think that there may be a second type of build that utilizes the Sawblade Scamp more than Icarus Synthesizer as a sort of continuous source of pinging. So, but maybe having both is pretty useful. And because those cards are good, I think that Experimental Augury again is good in this deck, because you want to maybe have a couple of bombs, one bomb or something in your deck. So you want some card selection. You want to have few creatures. So Experimental Augury is extra good because it allows you to find creatures when you're short on them, and allows you to focus on casting non-creature spells. Now, worth reminding, if you didn't watch the previous seminar, that I do think that a very key part of those decks are going to be cheap for Mirrodin cards, because they are non-creature spells that act as creatures, and it's going to be pretty important to have those in your deck, so you both have early drops, but at the same time have a high density of non-creature non-creature spells. Right, blue green, aka we didn't have a plan with that deck. It looks very much like an afterthought to me, which is weird because when, proliferate is one of the main mechanics of the set, but it looks like the main proliferate archetype is sort of an afterthought. It doesn't make me feel strongly about it. Signpost is Tainted Observer, one green blue for a 2/3 flyer, which is an okay rate, I guess. It has Toxic one. But important part of it is that whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 if you do proliferate. So I guess that you want to have things that will benefit from proliferating if you play a card like that. And Toxic is just not enough as it on its own. So I selected the key cards in Incubation Sac, which I think might be sneaky good in this format. It's a 1 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters, and for 4 in the top, you can remove an oil counter from it to create a 3/3 Phyrexian Golem artifact creature, and you can only do it as a sorcery. And I remind you of that, but I'm also sure that I will have at least 2 games where I will not activate it on my turn, just to wait to do it at the end of turn of my opponent, and then just go like, oh, that will happen for sure. But Incubation Sack will just start churning out 3/3s again in a format when there's not many 6/6s, so those 3/3s are quite large. And if you have proliferate synergies, you can make 5 instead of 3 of those, and that's really a good rate. It will take over the game at some stage, and if they deal with those, then you don't play other things from your hand. You should have enough things to drop on board after that happened, because you are able to save cards and play them later. So if you make it into a 3 or 4 or 5 for 1, because you make them bunch of 3/3s, that's going to be fine, even if those 3/3s are slightly more expensive than they should be. Evolving Adaptive is another card I see pretty strong in this archetype. That's the 1 mana 0/0 with the oil counter, and that becomes as big as the number of oil counters you have. Again, curve outs of this into a 2-drop, into a 3-drop, especially that it takes into account both power and toughness. So, for example, you can play the Tainted Observer on turn 3 when the Evolving Adaptive is a 2/2, and it will become a 3/3. So it will grow with the game as you play things, which is great. Makes it pretty useful. And then when you don't have any other creatures to make it bigger, you can start proliferating to make it bigger, and your 1-drop can be easily like a 5/5/6/6 kind of threat, which they have to deal with. And you only invested 1 mana in it, and you did what the deck wants you to do on top of it. So that looks like a very valid strategy. The key commons, again, Experimental Augury. And I think that those kind of decks traditionally had many uses to top end and card draw. That's why I put Vivi Surgeon's Insight, the 3 blue sorcery, draw 3 cards, proliferate, because it draws quite a lot of cards, but it also proliferates, which is something that technically the archetype wants to be doing. So I think maybe this is going to be secretly a card that you want to have 1-2 copies to make sure that once you reach your 5 mana, you also don't run out of gas, and you can continue pushing board presence and winning through that, while the other decks start to falter at that stage. And that's why I also put Oil Gorger Troll, 3 green. When it enters the battlefield, gain 3 life, and then if you control a permanent with an oil counter, draw a card, and it's a 3/4. Same reason, you stabilize with your life a bit, you put a body that is hard to deal for decks that have smaller creatures, and hopefully most of the time you should be able to draw a card from it as well. Okay, black-red, we're almost getting there. Charforger, 1 black-red, Phyrexian Beast, 2/3. When it EDBs, create a 1/1 goblin. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Charforger. Remove 3 oil counters from Charforger. You may exile top card of your library, and you may play it this turn. Remember, not until the end of your next turn, this turn. You have to play it the moment when you activate Charforger. And again, you can only... Oh no, you can't even do it only as a sorcery, so you can actually activate an opponent's turn and realize that what you have is not an instant and get angry with yourself. But 3 mana 2/3 that makes a 1/1 good. Whenever another creature artifact you control is put into graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on it. Uh, I don't think it will happen that often, but maybe, once every 2 games you will be able to claw its way to 3 counters, and then you get a card draw from the thing that was already a 2 for 1. So pretty decent amount of value from it. But it's not like super synergistic in my head, at least. I mean, there are some sacrifice themes, and I put them here in the key cards. There's the Chittering Skitterling, 3 mana 1/4, and when you have corrupt, sacrifice an artifact or creature to draw a card. Activate only if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, and only once each turn. So this one can use some stuff that you don't care about and sacrifice it to draw a card while building up the Charforger. But actually, Chittering Skittling seems like a better card drawing engine that Charforger will ever be. Alex Canada says that the card that 1 mana destroy your own artifact and make 3 goblins will be MVP in this deck. That very well be. Because Chittering Skitterling is such a cheap sacrifice outlet, there is a chance that Awaken the Sleeper is going to be a good card in this deck. Unfortunately, the threaten effect in this set is going to be at uncommon, so you won't have those decks with 5 of them, most likely. But I don't know. I guess that black red, it doesn't look super synergistic, so it's going to be probably play the good black and red cards and hope for the best. The problem with the keeping like things like Chittering Skitterling is that only black will have access to Corrupted. So if you want to activate it, don't hope that it will happen too early in the game. Most likely, this is going to be like mid to late game kind of activation of the Corrupted on Chittering Skitterling, unless something spectacular happens. Worth noting, red does have some proliferation, black does have some proliferation, so maybe you just need like to deal 1 poison damage and then hope to proliferate the rest or use the spells to make the rest. Key commons. Annihilating Glare. I think that this card can be good because it's also like a 1 mana sack activation for the threaten effect. This is a 1 mana sorcery. As an additional cost, you may pay for or sacrifice an artifact or creature, and then you destroy target creature or planeswalker. So you can steal something, play Annihilating Glare, sacrifice the thing that you've stolen, and kill the second best thing that the opponent had. So pretty good. But if you also have disposable bodies and you want to make your Char Forger getting extra oil, you can sacrifice something to Annihilating Glare. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of things you can do with it, and in the end, it becomes a medium 5 mana sorcery speed removal spell, which is, I guess, fine when you consider that there are some potential upsides in your deck. I'm not super high on that card in other colors, but I think in red, black, it might be actually pretty playable. It's a shame that Arena is still going to draft it as a premium removal, because that's what always happens. Another key common that didn't appear on any other list is the Stinging Hive Master, 3 mana 3/2 with Toxic 1. When it dies, create a 1/1 Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. This again, it's a card that makes 2 pieces of cardboard. I'm pretty sure you can trade it with something, and then you get a 1/1 Might, which is also available for sacrifice, available to deal toxic damage, a bunch of stuff that you can do with it. And the last one is Testament Bearer, the 4 mana 4/1. When it dies, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. This is the Organ Hoarder at home. It's a much worse card, but actually, if Black Red wants to play a bit more defensive, grinding game, Testament Bearer might be okay, because 4 power is pretty good on the defensive. It's just very bad on attack because it will just be a magnet for any 1/1. But on the other hand, this one, even if it dies to a 1/1, you kill the 1/1 and you got the best card of your top 3, which is still not a terrible deal for you to have. Right. Black green. The Signpost uncommon, Necrogen Rot Priest, 2 black green. Creature, Phyrexian Zombie Cleric. Too many creature types nowadays. Back in my day, it was either Goblin or Merfolk. There was nothing else. It's just annoying to read. It has Toxic 2, so quite a lot. It's a 1/5. which is quite a lot of butt in this format. 5 will survive quite a lot. And whenever a creature you control with toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter, which means that this effectively attacks as a toxic 3 creature. And also, it has another ability for 1 black green. Target creature you control with toxic gains death touch until end of turn. So every toxic creature that you have becomes a big threat that you know is going to trade up. What it means to me is that you want to play Necrogen Rot Priest with small creatures with toxic 1. So the 1/1s, the 2/2s with toxic 1, because they all of a sudden become toxic 2, which makes it really tough not to block them. And at the same time, if you do block them, anything that blocks them dies. So I would combine it with things like the indestructible death touch trick, things like ways of getting creatures back on board, things of removing blockers very quickly, because the fact that every creature that you have gains additional toxic, if it has any, it will compound quite quickly. Therefore, I think Necrogen Rot Priest is a card that you want to be using in decks that want to kill with poison, not just get corrupted, because there are not so many great corrupted payoffs in black and green. I think most important corrupted payoffs are in actual white. Um, so you don't care about that corrupted getting 3 poison. You might as well care about completely killing the opponent. And because of that, I put as a key card the Paladin of Predation, because that thing, if you manage to do some early, poison damage, you put the Paladin of Predation on board, and well, now you basically have to deal with some kind of evasion plan, and they will die. But even if they don't, it's a big thing that is really hard to kill. It will turn into the abyss for them. They will have to sacrifice every a creature every turn, or they will die. And that's why I put viral spawning as well, because this becomes much better when you have Necrogen Rot Priest and killing with poison. And it also brings you multiple bodies, and you want to have those multiple bodies if you want to kill with poison. So I think viral spawning is pretty useful. It should be online most of the time, because your plan should be to kill with poison. Therefore, you need to get a lot of it from the early time. Then the key commons, uh, Branch Blight Stalker, 3/1 with Toxic 2. People will want to block it. That's why I think Offer Immortality is important in this archetype, because people will actively want to block it. Offer Immortality will make sure that it becomes an unfavorable trade, and keep your Stalker on board. And this especially is going to work well against decks that have no 1-drops and pretty good 2-drops, because they will lose them. Or you manage to deal with their 2-drop, and then they have to, like a solid 3-drop that will have to deal with the Branch Blight Stalker, and then you play your Offer of Immortality and they feel really bad. Again, the 2/4 menacing toxic 2 creature, I think, is going to be pretty good in that archetype as well. And Pestilent Siphoner, the 2-mana 1/1 with Flyer and Toxic 1, uh, is going to be really good in pushing this toxic damage, especially if you have a Necrogen Rot Priest, when it will become a toxic 2 creature, which means it kills much faster with poison than it does with actual damage. And we got there, last archetype. We have Cinderlash Ravager as a signpost in red green. That's 4 red and green. In red green, who would have known? Creature, Phyrexian Warrior. It's a 5/5. It costs 1 less to cast for each permanent you control with an oil counter on it. So you can imagine Curvehouse when it costs 4 mana. And those are going to be great Curvehouse. Like, for example, with Armored Scrap Gorger, that gets a counter, and you play some kind of another creature with oil counter, and all of a sudden, on turn 4, you can play Cinderlash Ravager. But wait, there's more. It also has Vigilance, so it's a 5/5 Vigi creature. That's huge in this format. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Now, obviously, there is a cute interaction with it with Offer Immortality when you can play it, and with the damage trigger on stack, you play Offer Immortality on your Cinderlash Ravager, and it basically plague wins your opponent. It's a cute interaction. Please don't try it at home. Leave it to Ethan. Ethan will try it for you. Obviously, I mean Lord Tupperware, who loves these kinds of build around. I think it's slightly too cute to play, but the ability of dealing one to everything is quite useful. It will clear all the mites. It will kill a bunch of smaller toxic creatures, and it leaves behind a pretty sizable 5/5 vigilance body. So I put as a key card also Armored Scrap Gorger. We talked about it, the O3 mana accelerant. Um, I think that this deck will want bigger things, and because it wants bigger things, it wants maybe to ramp with it. And also, Armored Scrap Gorger allows you to ramp while at the same time supporting the oil counter synergy that is quite important for the archetype. So it does like lots of small things, and at the end it becomes a 3/3, which is all fine as a stat line for a 2 mana creature. So yeah, does a lot of small things great, and it just seems to me that it fits perfectly to what red green wants to do. And the other creature I put that might be key, and I still don't know about how powerful is the ability of it, is the Magmatic Sprinter. That's a 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/2 haste creature. When it ETBs, you put 2 oil counters on any artifact or creature you control. And at the beginning of your end step, return it to its owner hand unless you remove 2 oil counters from it. So you can either put the oil counters on itself, and then you remove them, and it stays on board for 1 extra turn, and then it gets bounced, which I think is just not something that I would be interested in. I think if I'm interested in playing this card, I want to play it, maybe swing with haste if I can for a cheeky 3 damage. But if I can't, I just bounce it back and I put 2 oil counters on some other creature. Like maybe the 1 mana green thing that gets +1/+1 for each oil counter. Maybe on something that gets utility out of it. There's plenty of things that you can put oil counters on and get profit out of them. And this card will allow you for sort of like 3 mana with buyback. Remains to be seen if 3 mana with buyback is good, but it's actually a decent mana sink for the later game. In terms of commons, obviously Contagious Vorak is important because it proliferates and ramps you ish. I mean, gives you extra lands. I put Kuldotha Cackler. It's a 3 mana 2/3 trampler. When it attacks, it gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. And this card easily becomes a 4/3, maybe even 5/3 in the right deck, which is not bad for a 3 mana common in terms of how you push damage. Um, I mean, obviously, it will die very happily, readily, but before it does, it will deal some serious amount of damage. And again, as a common, you will probably have a chance of getting multiples of them. Um, and the last card I put in there is Axiom Engraver. It's a 1 mana, 2 mana 1/3, 1 and a red, 1/3. It comes to the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it, and you can tap and remove an oil counter from it to damage, basically. And red green usually has a problem that it plays some threats and then it runs out of steam. And I think that in this format, there is actually some grindy staying potential for the red green decks. And also the oil synergies look pretty potent. So I'm looking forward to trying some red green builds, and remains to be seen what's going to be important in them. Uh, but there is also the Flametongue Kavu that deals damage for a number of permanents with oil counters you control. There is the cool combat trick that gives +2/+2 and puts 2 oil counters on a target. Um, there's plenty of things to be done with this oil synergy, and I think red green might have some kind of good. So Mike Proventures just wrote on in chat that that set feels like it has fewer blanket good common uncommons and a lot more cards that are good in some color pairs and bad in the other color pairs. Yes, I think that this is going to be especially amplified by the fact that green will sometimes play oil and sometimes play poison, and cards that are good for oil are not necessarily good for poison and vice versa. So this set is going to be very much more subtle in terms of what is good. And yeah, I think that you're right that archetypist data is going to be quite interesting to look at in this set, when we will have like multiple clusters of decks. And actually, yeah, that's something I'm hoping for, and I don't know if I will be able to, because of course people concede all the time just to make my life miserable. But it would be nice to see, are there clusters of decks that win more frequently with poison damage, and are there um, clusters of deck that don't win, or are not even close with poison damage. I might just like calculate the number of poison counters at the end of the game for each deck. And obviously, deck that was close to killing with poison counters will probably have 8, and the one that didn't even try will have like 1 or 2, and try to cluster those decks based on how much poison they dealt, and then look at the win rates of those kind of things for the archetypes. Obviously, this is all in the far away future of 4 weeks from now, but it's good to think about those things in advance. Right, but with that, we got through. So I will give acknowledgements. As I don't know, you read my tweet from last week. It's important to support 17 lands. Apart from supporting them by mentioning them after every seminar, I would strongly encourage you to become a patron of 17 lands on Patreon. Um, it's not fair that Rob, the viral misnomer, aka Mr. 17 Lands, paid from his own pocket and quite substantial amount of money over the last 3 months, because there was just no way of doing that. I think Mike. I think that To That Cube made something like buy me a coffee, when you just can pay single kind of time if you are not into Patreon and paying regularly. And obviously, like, the best way of supporting, as with everything, the best way of supporting is spreading the word, mentioning to people, convincing people to use it, and also convincing people to support it in one way or the other. So these are the best ways. But of course, the team of 17 Lands is working tirelessly to make it a pleasant experience. And now they were, dealing with a lot of stuff, because a new set means new problems with logging and stuff like that. So Ale Ballini. Mike. I think Patreon has the best rate of what you pay and what Viral Misnomer gets. Um, and again, I think that the buy a coffee thing is, you can just put any amount of money into it, and it will go towards 17 lands. But I don't have the link for that at hand. I think that it exists. Best thing to ask, I think, To That Cube did it at some stage. And I think that, because I know that there is a difference between like one of support and recurring one. And uh, obviously, there is going to be maybe slight revamp of Patreon tier levels for 17 lands, because um, guys are great in data, but maybe not amazing in monetizing, as it usually becomes. People who are dealing with data not necessarily focus on monetizations instantly. uh, but in the end, yeah, I mean, yeah, it took him 3 months to complain that he has to pay for the for the site. If only he said earlier, I would have written about it way earlier. But that's how those data nerds are, not good in monetization, but very good at data, and very good at delivering you an excellent service. So especially big thanks to Ale Ballini, who probably spent several dog years on trying to figure out how Phyrexia OB1 functions in the new logs, and making sure that all the mechanics are nice. Also, thanks to Fake Jig Brown, who's helping me with releasing this as a podcast. So, thanks to him, they're always helpful in uh, getting rid of all my and 20-second pauses that I introduced into this stream. So, yeah, thanks for that. And thanks to my sponsor, mtgazone.com, for their patience of me not writing any article. And hopefully, I can repay them now by starting to write banger after banger, as one does. And thanks to Asescu and Mana Jungi for the music I use in the podcast version of this. And with that, I'll see you probably not far away from now. Probably in 3 days or so, I'll try to take a slight dip into the early data on Thursday when we can look at the a very early win rate data and talk about what does it mean for the format, but also what to look at in the first days and what are the obstacles of analyzing early data at the same time. But until then, bye.